Good afternoon to all our participants online with us today and to all our presenters. First of all, I'd like to offer my heartfelt thanks to Professor Cha, Dr. Che, and Mr. Hong for their informative and illuminating presentations. They really highlighted the crucial role of Koreans in America in promoting Korean independence. As Professor Cha said, it's important for Korean Americans to know their history as it is part of their identity. But our gathering, our forum today, is not simply about honoring the past and recognizing noble characters and their aspirations. It also is a time to look back to the past in order to look forward. The Samil movement hoped for a Korea that was, quote, united, independent, and free. And the new United Nations, right after the Second World War, echoed that sentiment and said that Korea should be a country that is united, independent, and free. That Korea has still not been achieved, as we feel all too painfully, and especially Korean people, whether in Korea or in the diaspora. Korea today is not united, it is not free, and how can a divided people be truly independent? So I'd like to make a few points related to what our presenters have said and also to the overall situation. First of all, many people, especially Americans, think of Korea in terms of the Korean War and the connection that was formed between the US and Korea through the Korean War and defense of Korea by US forces together with other nations in the United Nations forces. But the connection between America and Korea long predates the war. It actually goes back to the closing decades of the 19th century when Christian missionaries were very active in Korea and had a tremendous influence on many young Koreans who wanted to see change in their society to a more just, free, democratic type of society. So there are missionaries such as Horace Underwood, Henry Appenzeller, the Methodist, who founded a school in 1886 called the Peje Mission School. And at that school, some of the people we've heard about today were either teachers or students. Philip Jason, Soje Pil, was a teacher at the Peje Mission School, and among his students was Syngman Rhee. So these missionaries had a tremendous influence, not just in religious terms, in terms of personal spiritual life, but the Peje School was really created as a nation-building institution in order to raise future leaders. And it succeeded because key future leaders came out of that school. In moving to the Samil movement itself and the response in America, in April 1919, right after the Samil demonstrations had begun in Korea, just the following month, there was a Korean National Congress held in Philadelphia, organized by Philip Jason at Constitution Hall. So there was a very clear intention there to link the desire for Korean independence and the principles on which it would stand with the American founding and American independence and the principles embodied particularly in the Declaration of Independence, stating that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights. The Korean Americans such as Philip Jason took this as an inspiration and something they wanted to see implemented in their own country. On that foundation, there was a significant outreach by Korean Americans, groups and organizations to the US Congress, the legislature, the executive, and to civil society. So churches, pastors, Also educators, teachers, and professional people, businessmen, were all contacted and connected with this movement for Korean independence and had great sympathy and support for it. So that's one point I want to, that there's a deep connection between the US and Korea and Koreans going back to the late 19th century and rooted in principles and ideals. Second thing I want to say is the importance of unity in striving for a united Korea. At the Korean National Congress in Philadelphia in 1919, there were 27 different Korean organizations in America that came together, joined together, and supported the reading of the declaration of the Korean Declaration of Independence and the subsequent appeal to America that was written and distributed around the country. So they all came together with one ideal and one purpose. Really, 1922 was the high watermark of that type of unity. Later, divisions arose, and even though the leaders of different organizations recognized that this hampered their work, they couldn't overcome them and create a united front and effort. And that really only came about with the onset of World War II. So importance there is the point I want to make there is the importance of a united purpose and ideal that different organizations can come together to support. The third thing, and closing, is I want to talk about the need for a vision and for guiding principles. Partly the leaders we've heard about today core a vision from the American founding ideals through the Christian missionaries who came to Korea and through their study in America, Syngman Rhee, Philip Jason, and Chang Ho. They were very much taken by American ideals from the Declaration of Independence. But also the Samil movement itself and the words of the Korean Declaration of Independence had a vision that drew on Korean history and the spirit of Hongik Ingan, the Hongik Ingan tradition. So their goal was not only to be free of Japanese rule to be an independent country, but they had a vision beyond that of actually being able to cooperate with Japan and China to create an ideal East Asian society of high ideals that would be of benefit to the world. And that type of idea is reflected in the words of Kim Gu, one of the leaders in the independence movement who did not spend a lot of time in America, some time, and was certainly influenced by American founding ideals. And he said with his vision for Korea was, I wish my nation would be a nation that doesn't just imitate others, but rather be a nation that is the source of a new and higher culture. And so true world peace would come from our nation, that's Korea. I wish peace would be achieved in our nation and from there to the world. A very high ideal and stirring vision, but one that you can see very much flows out of the Hongik Ingan ideal. And it's also reflected, echoed by Professor Cha in his closing remarks, where he talked about developing an identity as Koreans and Korean Americans with the idea that we can embrace everyone. To do that, he said, you have to know yourself first, so that means you have to know your history. And then on that basis, you can extend your compassion to all people. Again, that's something that flows out of this Hongik Ingan tradition and spirit. So I want to close in by mentioning a timely contemporary vision for a free and united Korea, namely the Korean dream that is an idea, a vision advanced by Dr. Hyunjin Preston Moon. In it, he draws on Korea's spiritual and cultural roots, especially the Hongik Ingan tradition. And this approach far transcends the economic, political, and ideological issues that have dominated discussion and political reality in the last 75 years of the divided Korea. And I'd like to conclude finally by suggesting how this approach might be not only a foundation for the reunification of the Korean people, the separated Korean people, but that it could have a global significance. In our current world, we face the challenge of conflicts, identity-based conflicts, and greater fragmentation without an overarching ideal. Ultimately, I believe, want to propose the antidote to such groups that are pursuing identity-based goals in a violent manner. The antidote must be a transcendent vision of humanity as one family, united under a common roof of universal principles and values, values and principles shared by all the great spiritual and ethical traditions. You might call that one family under God. That vision in turn must give rise to a global ethic that must be expressed in the moral practice of communities, societies, and nations, as well as in the relations between nations. And I want to suggest that Korea can make a major practical contribution to the emergence of such a global ethic if it creates a national vision based on Hongik Ingan, and on that basis reunites the Korean people of the North and the South. Such an achievement would resolve the major obstacle to peace and prosperous development in Northeast Asia, with positive implications for the rest of the world. As a result, Korea could become an inspirational example globally and a model for peaceful development. So in the story of Dangun, Hongik Ingan is linked closely with the principle of Jae-se-ihwa, or in roughly governing the world by law. I want to suggest this is not laws enacted by the state, but universal laws that reflect universal principles. And so we can understand the two concepts, Hongik Ingan and Jae-se-ihwa, taken together as an exhortation to govern the world through laws that reflect universal principles in order to form citizens who can act for the benefit of all humanity. This is indeed a noble aspiration, and I'm sure is at the heart of the Samil independence movement leaders and people who supported and worked for that movement. And it's one that Koreans, I think, should feel proud to own and desire to make it a reality in a restored homeland. And that is a future I hope that at least some of us will live to see. Thank you.